My stepdad Glen crashed my jacuzzi soak in Ohio, his grin too sharp, heat rising fast. I snapped at him to leave. He didn't. His hand grazed mine under the bubbles. Bold, wrong. I froze. He leaned closer. What we started there? You'll lose your mind. I was sinking into the backyard jacuzzi at our Ohio house one crisp evening, bubbles churning around me, trying to drown out Mom's latest client call about accent walls echoing from her office inside, when the glass door slid open and my stepdad Glen stepped out, a 58-year-old ex-gym owner now running a fitness center, his grin too sharp for someone who'd just wandered into my space. I'd told him I'd be out here, so his claim of thinking I'd left rang hollow, and I snapped at him to find his own spot, my voice cutting through the steam, wanting him gone before Mom noticed us together, her knack for picking up on weird vibes sharper than I liked. He didn't budge, sliding into the water across from me, saying I looked too tense for a soak and he knew a fix, his tone slick, like he'd been waiting for this, his arms stretching along the edge, inching my way. I shifted, pulling my knees up, saying he'd better not start with his trainer talk, my words cold to shut him down, but he leaned forward, saying tension was his specialty, and I'd thank him if I let him try, his eyes glinting, too bold, like he saw a game I wasn't playing. Mom's voice carried faintly, her call wrapping up, and I told him to cut it out, she'd be out any second, but he slid closer, saying she was too busy to notice, his hand dipping under the bubbles, grazing my ankle, not accidental, his fingers lingering like a dare, and I kicked at him, saying he was out of line, my voice low, sharp, to keep it from her ears, the jets roaring loud enough to mask us, but not my nerves. He pulled back, hands up, saying I'd misread him, just trying to help me chill, but his smirk said he'd meant every second, and I stood, water dripping, saying I didn't need his kind of help, my towel slipping as I climbed out, catching his glance before I yanked it tight, hating how it stuck in my head. I said he'd better stay out here alone, my tone biting, and he leaned back, saying I'd changed my mind, his voice calm, too sure, like he'd already bet on it, the jacuzzi's hum swallowing whatever else he might have added, but I felt it, heavy, like a hook I didn't want to touch. Mom's office light flicked off, her steps nearing the kitchen, and I bolted for the door, saying I'd grab a drink, my excuse thin, knowing she'd ask why I looked rattled if she saw me now. Inside, she was pouring coffee, asking if the jets were too loud, her eyes scanning me like she sensed something off, and I shrugged, saying I just needed a quick soak, my voice steady, but my skin burned where his hand had been, not from heat, but from how he'd played it, like he'd known I wouldn't yell. I grabbed a soda, saying I'd head upstairs, and glanced outside, Glen still in the jacuzzi, his head back, like nothing had happened, but I caught him watching me through the glass, a look that wasn't about relaxing, and I turned away. Mom's question about her meeting fading as I climbed the stairs, my mind stuck on his nerve, telling myself I'd keep him at arm's length, no matter how many times he tried. She didn't follow, her phone buzzing with another client, and I shut my door, the bubbles echo in my head, knowing he'd push again, and I'd have to push harder, because whatever he was starting, I wasn't letting it land, not with her so close, not when her voice could cut through any second. But his words stuck, sly, like they'd already slipped past my guard, and I wondered how long I could dodge him before something gave, the house too small for the game he'd kicked off in that water, and I wasn't sure I'd stay ahead. A few days after Glen's stunt in the jacuzzi left me on edge, I needed a ride to a friend's place across town, and Mom, buried in fabric swatches for a client's dining room, waved me off, saying Glen could handle it since he was heading out anyway. I wanted to argue, but her phone rang, another deadline, so I grabbed my bag, muttering I'd rather walk, though the Ohio chill in 20 miles said otherwise, and found Glen by his truck, keys dangling, his smile too easy, like he'd been waiting for a chance to corner me again. I told him to make it quick, climbing into the passenger seat, my voice flat to shut down whatever he thought this was, knowing Mom was distracted but not dumb, her knack for noticing off vibes something I couldn't shake after how close she'd come to spotting trouble last time. He started the engine, radio humming low, some old rock tune I didn't care to name, and said I seemed wound up, offering to take the long route if I needed to vent, his tone smooth, like he was doing me a favor, but I caught the edge, same as in the bubbles, and shot back that I vented fine without him, my arms crossed, staring out the window at strip malls blurring past. He chuckled, saying I'd crack a smile eventually, and switched lanes, claiming a detour would beat traffic, though the roads looked clear, his hand resting on the gear shift, close enough to make me shift my bag onto my lap, a wall I didn't need to explain, not with Mom's texts about curtain rods pinging my phone, reminding me she wasn't far enough to miss this if I slipped up. I turned up the radio, hoping noise would kill his chatter, but he tapped the wheel, saying I'd like his old gym stories if I gave them a chance, about nights he'd trained fighters who didn't play nice, and I said I wasn't here for a history lesson, my voice sharp, wanting him to drop it, but he kept going, saying I had fight in me too, the kind he'd spot a mile off, his eyes flicking my way, not long, just enough to make me grip my bag tighter, hating how he twisted it like we shared something. I told him to focus on the road, Mom wouldn't like him playing therapist, but he laughed, saying she'd never know unless I spilled, his words landing like a challenge, and I leaned back, saying I'd keep quiet if he did, my tone cold. But my mind snagged on why he thought he could push this far, like I'd let it slide. He pulled into a gas station, saying he needed smokes, and got out, leaving the truck running, but instead of staying put, I followed, saying I'd grab a soda, not wanting him to think I'd wait like some kid, and stood by the counter as he paid, his shoulder brushing mine when he turned, not an accident, his voice low, saying I'd look good behind a gym counter, like I'd fit his world, and I stepped away, saying his world wasn't mine, my hand shoving change at the clerk to break the moment. Mom's text buzzing, asking when I'd be back, like she'd sensed something off. I said we'd better move, she'd ask questions, and he nodded, saying questions were my call, his grin sly, like he'd scored a point, the fluorescent lights harsh, showing me too clearly I'd let him talk too long. Back in the truck, I cranked the window down, saying he'd better stick to driving, my voice firm, and he shifted gears, saying I'd warm up to him, like it was a done deal, his hand nowhere near me, but his words close enough to feel like a grab, and I stared ahead. Houses flashing by, knowing Mom was waiting, her coffee probably cold, her eyes too sharp for me to slip in flustered. I told him to drop me a block early, saying I'd walk the rest, not wanting her to see us roll up together, and he slowed, saying I'd call him next time, his voice too sure, like he'd already bet I'd crack, but I slammed the door, my bag swinging, the night air biting, his taillights fading as I swore I'd keep him out, no matter how slick he got. One rainy Ohio evening, about 10 days after Glen's car ride left me rattled, I was dodging Mom's chatter about throw pillows for a client's den, slipping into our basement to grab a box of old books I'd promised a friend, when I heard the treadmills hum and found Glen tinkering with its belt, his toolbox open, like he'd been waiting for a reason to be down here. Mom was upstairs, her voice carrying through the floorboards as she took a call, and I told Glen I'd be quick, not wanting another round of his games. My tone clipped to remind him I hadn't forgotten his stunt in the truck, but he stood, wiping grease off his hands, saying I looked like I needed a break, his smile too warm, like he thought he could slip past my guard again. I ignored him, pulling books from a shelf, saying he should fix his own messes, not mine, but he stepped over, offering to lift the box, saying I'd strain something hauling it alone, his voice smooth, too close, like he'd rehearsed it, and I pushed it myself, saying I'd managed fine before he started hovering, my words sharp to keep him at bay, knowing Mom's call could end any minute, her habit of checking on me when I went quiet making my skin prickle. He didn't back off, leaning against the treadmill, saying I'd been dodging him too hard, like I was scared of what he saw in me, and I snapped that he saw nothing, just liked pushing buttons, but my hands fumbled a book, and he caught it, setting it down, his arm brushing the box, not me, his move careful, like he knew one wrong step would send me bolting. He switched gears, saying he'd been out of line before, but it wasn't a game anymore, his voice dropping, saying he felt something real, something he hadn't with Mom in years, and I froze, the book in my hand heavy, his words landing like a punch I didn't expect. No smirk to soften it, just him standing there, toolbox at his feet, looking at me like I'd already answered. I told him to stop, he was crazy, Mom was right upstairs, but my voice shook, not just from anger, because part of me, a small, reckless part, felt a tug, like his nerve had cracked something open, and I hated it, hated how it stuck. Her laughter on the phone above us suddenly too loud, like she'd sensed the shift if I didn't move fast. I shoved the box aside, saying he'd lost it, but didn't leave, my feet glued, and he stepped closer, saying I felt it too, didn't I, his hand lifting, not touching, just near enough to make the air tight, like he'd bet everything on my silence. I opened my mouth to shut him down, but Mom's voice cut through, calling my name from the stairs, sharp, saying she needed help with a color sample, and I jolted, grabbing a book, yelling I'd be up, my voice too high, like I'd been caught, and Glen didn't flinch, just picked up a wrench, saying he'd finish here, his tone calm, but his eyes didn't leave me, like he knew I'd hurt him, really hurt him. I bolted up, Mom waiting by the landing, her gaze flicking to my empty hands, asking why I'd taken so long, a crease in her brow like she'd caught a wrong note, and I said the box was too heavy, I'd get it later. My words rushed, brushing past her to the kitchen. Her coffee mug still warm, a stain on her sketch pad where she'd spilled it, details she'd notice if I gave her half a chance. She didn't follow, diving back into her call, but I lingered by the sink, splashing water on my face, Glen's confession replaying, not just his nerve, but that flicker in me, something I'd never let out, something that scared me more than her walking in. I heard the treadmill stop below, his steps slow, deliberate, and I knew he'd wait, sure I'd bend, but I gripped the counter, telling myself I'd end this, keep her clueless, because whatever I'd felt down there wasn't worth the wreck it'd make, not yet, not with her voice still ringing in my ears. A month after Glen's basement confession flipped something inside me. I was restless in our Ohio house, Mom's mood boards for a new condo project swallowing every table, when Glen texted me to swing by his fitness center after closing, saying he needed a second opinion on some new gear before a big pitch, his words casual but carrying the same pull I'd felt when he'd stood too close down there. I'd been wrestling with that flicker of warmth since, hating how it stuck, so I hesitated, but curiosity, or something dumber, won, and I told Mom I'd be at a study group, her distracted nod as she shuffled fabric samples letting me slip out, though her knack for spotting lies kept me glancing back, like she'd sense I wasn't heading to a library. The gym was dark, its neon sign off, just a faint glow from the back where Glen waited, his flannel swapped for a black tee, looking more like the guy who'd built a weight room empire than the one dodging her client dinners, and I walked in, saying he'd better not expect me to lift anything, my tone half joking to mask the buzz in my chest, not sure if I was here to test him or myself. He handed me a water bottle, saying I'd be his guinea pig for a new rowing machine, no heavy stuff, and led me to a corner rig, the place empty except for the hum of a vent. Mom's texts about rug patterns the only thing tying me to her world, and I sat, saying I'd row if he spilled why he'd picked tonight, my voice sharp, probing, because his confession hadn't faded, and neither had my guilt. He adjusted the machine, kneeling to check its straps, saying he'd been thinking about me, not just that night, but every day since, and wanted me here to see if I'd meant what I didn't say, his voice low, not pushing, but cutting deeper than his old lines, like he'd bet on my silence again. I pulled the rower's handle, saying he was digging a hole he couldn't climb out of, Mom would bury him if she knew, but my hands shook, not from effort, because part of me wanted to hear it, wanted him to keep talking, and I hated how it fit, like a shirt I'd never wear in her house. He stood, saying I wasn't rowing away from this, and offered to spot me on a bench press instead, his hand gesturing to a barbell, not touching, but close enough I felt the air shift, like he'd turned the gym into his ring, and I was already in it. I slid onto the bench, saying I'd try it to shut him up, and he stood above, guiding the bar, saying I had more strength than I showed, his words double-edged, like he saw the crack I'd felt in the basement, and I pushed up, saying strength wouldn't help him when she found out, my voice biting, but I held his gaze, too long, because that flicker was growing, and I didn't shove it down fast enough. He leaned closer, adjusting my grip, saying I'd surprise myself one day, his fingers brushing the bar near mine, careful, deliberate, the weight light but the moment heavy, until a mop clattered in the hall, a janitor starting his rounds, his shadow passing the glass door, forcing me to rack the bar, my laugh forced, saying we'd scared the poor guy, breaking the spell, but not the pull. I stood, tossing him the water bottle, saying he'd flunked his pitch if this was his best, my tone playful to hide how his words had landed, and he caught it, saying I'd signed up for more than I thought, his voice calm, like he knew I'd come back. The gym's echo swallowing what I didn't answer. Mom's text lit my phone, asking if I'd grabbed dinner, her tone off, like she'd clocked my absence, and I said we'd better wrap it, not wanting her to call, her last question about Glen's late nights still ringing in my head. I headed out, saying I'd see him at home, my hand grazing the doorframe, not him, but enough to keep his eyes on me, and I knew I'd felt too much tonight, enough to scare me, enough to make me wonder what I'd do if he pushed again, with her waiting to catch the wrong move. By summer, I was suffocating under Mom's fabric samples and client calls clogging our Ohio house, her redesign projects louder than ever. When Glen texted me one muggy evening, saying he was scoping a rooftop deck for a gym networking event and needed my take, his invite sharp, like he knew I'd been wrestling with the heat he'd stirred in the basement and gym, a pull I couldn't shake no matter how much I tried. I shouldn't have gone, not with that flicker in me growing, but I told Mom I'd be at a coffee shop, her distracted hum over a mood board letting me slip out, though her knack for sniffing out lies had me checking my phone, like she'd text any second to ask where I really was. The rooftop was a bare slab above his fitness center, strung with cheap lights, city hum below, and Glen stood by a folding table, jeans swapped for cargos, looking less like a manager and more like the guy who'd built his own rules before Mom's schedules tamed him. And I said his event better not be as dull as his day job. My voice edged to keep distance, but my stomach twisted, knowing I'd come anyway. He tossed me a soda, saying I'd spice it up just by showing, his tone too easy, like he'd counted on me biting, and I cracked the can, saying I'd only stay if he made it worth my time, my words testing, because part of me wanted him to try, even if I'd sworn I'd stop this after his last confession. He suggested truth or dare, saying it'd keep us sharp while we planned, and I laughed, calling it kid stuff, but sat across from him, saying truth, figuring I'd dodge anything heavy, not ready for his hands near me like in the gym. And he asked what I'd never told Mom, his question slicing deeper than I'd braced for, like he'd aimed for the crack I'd felt since the basement. I said I'd skipped a college class to joyride once, keeping it light, but flipped it, daring him, and he chose truth, so I asked what he'd risked most, expecting a dodge, but he leaned forward, saying he'd bet everything on someone who didn't know her own pull. His voice low, raw, meaning me, and I froze, the soda can cold in my hand, because that flicker in me flared, guilty, wrong, but real, and I couldn't look away, not this time. I switched to dare, saying he'd gone too far, and he grinned, telling me to climb the deck's railing, just to stand, nothing crazy, so I did, balancing, wind tugging my shirt, saying he'd have to catch me if I fell, my voice shaky, not from height, but from how he watched, like I was the event he'd planned, and he stood below, saying I'd never need catching, his words double-edged, pulling me closer to something I'd fought. I dared him to tell me something he'd never say at home, and he stepped up, close now, saying he'd leave it all, her, the house, for one real shot, his hand near the railing, not grabbing, but steady, like he'd jump if I did, and I stepped down, saying that wasn't a dare, my voice soft, because I felt it too, that pull, and it scared me, worse than falling, Mom's last call about a late meeting flashing in my head. A neighbor's shout cracked the night, someone yelling about noise from a balcony below, and I stumbled, Glen's hand steadying the railing, not me, his laugh covering it, saying we'd pissed off the wrong guy, and I climbed down, saying we'd blown it, my tone forced, because the game had cut too deep, and I wasn't dodging anymore, not fully. I grabbed a marker, sketching table spots for his event, saying he'd better not expect me to show, my hand brushing the paper near his, deliberate, admitting more than I meant, and he said I'd be there, he'd make sure, his voice calm, like he'd won something. Mom's text buzzing, checking if I'd eaten, like she'd felt the shift across town. I left, saying I'd walk to my car, not wanting him to follow, my steps heavy, the rooftop's lights fading, knowing I'd let him in too far, and her questions would hit harder if I didn't pull back, but that flicker wasn't shrinking, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to, not yet. 6 months after Glen first rattled me in the jacuzzi, I was fraying under the weight of Mom's fabric bolts and client deadlines cluttering our Ohio house. When I wandered into the guest room one humid August night, restless from dodging the pull that had grown since his basement confession and our rooftop dares, only to find Glen there, adjusting a wobbly floor lamp, his toolbox open, like he'd picked this quiet corner to wait for me. Mom was supposedly at a design summit in Cleveland, her absence a rare gap, and I said he'd better not break anything, my voice light to mask the jolt of seeing him, knowing I'd let that flicker of feeling burn too long, even his guilt gnawed harder since I'd leaned into it last time. Her last text about travel delays still unanswered on my phone. He stood, screwdriver in hand, saying the lamp was a quick fix, but I looked like I needed one more, his tone soft, not slick like before, and I told him to stick to furniture, stepping to the window, pretending to check the latch, wanting distance, but he set the tool down, saying he'd been thinking about me, not just tonight, but every night, and couldn't keep it quiet anymore, his words raw, like he'd torn down the last wall between us. I turned, saying he'd gone too far. Mom would be back soon, my voice sharp to pull myself back, but I stayed put, the room's dim glow holding me, because that flicker wasn't just his, it was mine, and I'd fed it, daring him on that roof, letting it grow. And now it scared me, how close I'd let it get, her coffee mug still on her desk downstairs, like she'd walk in any second. He moved to the lamp, tightening its base, saying he didn't expect me to answer, just to hear him, and asked me to hold the shade steady, a simple task that felt like a trap, but I did it, standing near, my fingers brushing the metal, his hand guiding mine. Not grabbing, just close enough to make the air thick, like he'd turned the room into a test I wasn't sure I'd pass. I said we'd regret this, my voice low, but I didn't pull away, asking why he'd risk it all. And he said I was worth more than what he'd built with her, his breath even, his eyes steady, not chasing, but waiting, and I stepped closer, saying that was a lousy bet. My hand still on the shade, inches from his, the lamp's light casting shadows that danced like we did, every word pulling us tighter, my guilt screaming to stop, but that warmth drowning it, just for a moment. I let go, saying we'd fix it later, and moved to the bed's edge, sitting, not to invite, but to think, and he followed, kneeling to check a loose leg, saying he'd make it right, his voice double-edged, and I leaned forward, saying right wasn't here, not now. My fingers tapping the frame, daring him to argue, and he looked up, saying here was all we had, his hand resting on the bedpost, near my knee, not touching, but so close I felt it, the room shrinking, the lamp's hum loud, like it'd carry to her if she walked in. I stood, saying we'd gone far enough, my voice shaky, and he rose too, stepping near, saying we hadn't gone anywhere yet, his shirt brushing the air by my arm, every second stretching, teasing, like we'd break if either moved first, and I wanted to see how far, until I saw her photo on the nightstand, her smile, his arm around her, and it hit me, hard, that this wasn't just wrong, it was hers, and I'd stolen it. I backed up, saying I couldn't, my voice cracking, and ran downstairs, grabbing my phone, dialing Mom, her voicemail picking up, and I spilled it, saying I'd messed up. Glen had too, we'd gone too far, my words tumbling, knowing she'd hear it when she landed. The front door flew open, she wasn't in Cleveland, her summit cut short, and she stormed in, eyes wild, screaming what I'd done, her voice shredding me, saying she'd seen my calls, his late nights, the way I dodged her, and now this. Accusing Glen of dragging me down like he'd done before, her words hinting at secrets I'd never heard, throwing a sketchbook at the wall, yelling I'd broken her, and I stood, frozen, as Glen's steps hit the stairs behind me, his silence louder than her rage, the guest room's lamp still on, its light spilling out, leaving me to face what I'd let burn too long.